Alright guys, so Smith & Wesson Shield 9mm. I know a lot of you guys have bought these in the last couple months, especially with Smith & Wesson's rebate that they had going on. I've been carrying a Glock 27 and 40 caliber for about 12 years now as my kind of plainclothes or concealed carry handgun. Overall, I've been pleased with it. I shoot it pretty well, but it's a thick gun because it's a double stack, and that recoil is snappy. You know, I find that it's controllable, but it does, you know, the muzzle rise you get with that 40 is significant. So I've been considering a 9mm, either a double stack or a single stack. I thought I'd try one out. So the Shield was kind of pretty low on my radar. It was one of those, you know, one of these days maybe I'll get a 9mm, but I wasn't in a big hurry. So a buddy of mine does a gun dealership out of his house, and he told me that he had some of these 9mm in stock. So with the rebate and everything, I thought, yeah, you know what, I'll give it a try. So I did pick one up. This is the 9mm version, and I believe I paid $353 out the door, tax, background, everything said and done. Yeah, I have seen them a little bit cheaper in some places. I've definitely seen some of the big box stores offering them for more than $353. But after the $75 rebate, basically invested in this gun, I have $278. So for $278, there's not a lot of options that really compare, in my mind, to the quality of this gun and what exactly this gun can do. So let's kind of take a look at some of the things I've liked so far, and kind of maybe some of the things that I would either change or wouldn't mind doing a little differently. Okay, so first off, the gun ships with 2 magazines. One's got an extension on it, it holds 8 rounds. One does not have an extension, and it only holds 7. Now, this isn't that dissimilar from what I was doing with the Glock. So the Glock 27 that I was carrying held 9 rounds. So I'm losing 1 round compared to the extended, 2 rounds compared to the non-extended. And then depending on what I was doing with it, if I was wearing, you know, heavier clothing or a jacket or something where I wouldn't need that extra little bit of concealment, I would wear the one with the extension, which is what I still do. If I don't need to really be as concealed as possible, I use the magazines with the extensions, the 8-rounders. The 7-rounders, you know, I'll show you in a little bit, but my fingers kind of hang off with the 7-round. But that does give me the opportunity with just a very basic t-shirt on to put this 7-rounder in there and make the gun just a little more concealable. Because I know those of you that conceal handguns, you know, you got your CCW or you're carrying off duty, you know, the butt end of that gun can make a difference. That's often what will stick out. The butt and the top of the slide are kind of the 2 points that will typically stand out. So, you know, if you really need that extra concealment, you've got that 7-round. More often than not, I find this gun small enough that even with this 8-rounder, I'm comfortable with the way it conceals, especially with either a low profile holster or inside the waistband style holster. So I'm typically wearing it carrying the 8-round, and then as backups I'll carry either some of the 7 rounds or 8 rounds. But one of the things a lot of people have complained about with the 8-round is the fact that this extension is not solidly attached. Now, when it's inserted into the gun, you're not going to notice a difference. When it's inserted in there, it's going to be held in place and it's going to be fine. Where the issue becomes is if you're carrying these magazines, and you know, if you carry it in a pocket, if you carry it in a mag pouch, it has the possibility to slide around. Now, just the fact that it moves is not in and of itself a problem. What becomes the problem is if you go to insert this magazine and it's moved, when you go to insert it, it will kind of hang up wherever that catches. So, at least with mine, it moves fairly easily out of the way. So if you're giving it a good tap, it's going to go in like it's supposed to. For me, you can kind of see the way where my palm is compared to the gun by itself. Another thing I've found is I tend to pinch my hand. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about some of what I don't like. So that's a little bit on the magazine differences. Overall though, you know, I wouldn't really call these a true single stack magazine. You could tell by the profile, it does get a little narrower at the top. So they do spread out just a little bit, not like a true double stack, but just a little bit of a spread as they come down. Overall, I've had no issues with the feeding or the function of the magazine. The only potential complaint is just the fact that this moves. If you really wanted to, you could use a little glue or something, and you could attach it where it can't move. You could glue it in place, but that's going to potentially make it easier to get, or I'm sorry, it'd get a little difficult to take that base pad off if you need to. All right, so another thing that I like, single stack, or like I just mentioned, not truly single stack, but much thinner overall than the Glock double stack subcompacts. Of course, same thing with if you get a M&P subcompact. That's something that, you know, when I looked at the specs and I read the numbers and I kind of held these in the store, it never really seemed to be that big of a deal to me. I didn't think that the little bit of thinness that you get really made that much of a difference. Having carried this now for several months, what I have noticed though is it is more comfortable, especially on an inside the waistband holster. It was something that I didn't really think would be that much of a difference, but it actually has been. I have noticed that my hip and around my waist where my belt is not nearly as sore with the thinner single stack style gun as it was with the double stack Glock. So even though it's not a huge difference, it does, to me, make a difference in the comfort of carrying it all day. And let's face it, comfort in carrying all day can be a big deal, because I know there have been some days where I have, and I'm sure a lot of you have decided to go ahead and leave a gun at home because it wasn't comfortable. And you know, that it's kind of nice to know that if you decide to go ahead and carry it, especially for a long day. You know, it's one thing to go out of the house for a few hours, run some errands, and then come back. But, you know, if you're really going to be out of the house for 15 hours, you know, you got stuff planned all day long, this makes a difference, to me at least, having the thinner profile. So another thing that I like, and that I feel like with the 9mm in the Smith & Wesson Shield, is, to me, the recoil impulse is much more manageable. I mean, when you see me shooting it, you'll still see it's not that there is no recoil, but to me it feels like you know, when you're doing either double taps or you fire a series of 4 or 5 rounds, to me it's much quicker to get back on the target, and it feels like my hand comes back into target, back onto target quicker and more effectively. So I find my, you know, rapid fire, which, you know, it's a subcompact handgun. It's not like I'm out here just bang, 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 bang away. But if I want to do a drill or something like that that involves a draw and then maybe 4 or 5 rounds on target and then switch, you know, this one just, to me, I feel like I can fire much faster and more, and keeping those rounds more accurately than I was with the Glock. So to me, that recoil impulse is just a lot more smooth and controllable than I felt like the Glock 27 in 40 caliber was. And now granted, that's not an entirely fair comparison because we are talking about different calibers, but that's just my experience switching from the Glock to the 9mm Shield. So another thing with the trigger. So the trigger, not unlike a Glock, has 2 parts. The difference is the bottom portion of the trigger is what pivots first, and then it moves the top part instead of having the center piece like a Glock does, where you have to move the center part of the trigger back and then the entire trigger can move. So to me, this trigger is just more, it feels more comfortable, especially if I'm not shooting with gloves, which a lot of the summer I'm not. I would actually have the Glock triggers, it wouldn't hurt to shoot, but the tip of my finger would go numb on a long range day. If I'm shooting a couple hundred rounds, the tip of my finger would eventually go numb. So it wasn't hurting, it just, I'm guessing the way it pressed and had that little more narrow bit of pressure from that initial trigger pull, it would make my trigger finger go numb. I don't notice that with this, and because of the smooth face of the trigger, to me this just feels a little smoother. Now it is still a fairly long trigger pull, and it's still a not a single action. You know, you've probably seen video of me shooting my 1911 TRP, you know, not exactly an aftermarket trigger, but just a much crisper, shorter pull trigger. So this is still not the exact same as shooting one of those, but I do believe that, to me personally, I felt like this trigger pull, here go this way, that this trigger pull is just a little bit smoother. Now there's a lot more over travel than I'm used to. So I've also noticed some of the earlier complaints with the M&P that I saw was kind of a spongy reset, and with the 2.0 and the more recent releases, that seems to be a little more of an audible, tactile reset. To me, again, it feels a little more squishy than the Glock did. The Glock felt a little sharper, but this is definitely workable, easy to use. So as you kind of heard already, you know, overall, I do like this. I like it a little more than the Glock 27 that I've been shooting. So this has now become my everyday CCW carry handgun. So overall, I really like it. But it's not perfect, just like any handgun. So what are some of the issues that I've had? One, with the magazines, I kind of mentioned this earlier. So far, the way I've been carrying and using the 7-rounder as my backup magazine, I have not had a real big issue with the piece of the extension moving, because I've almost always got the 8-rounder in the gun, and then I'm using 7-round magazines for my, you know, carry in a pocket or a mag pouch, so that they're lower profile. So I haven't had much of an issue with that. The issue I do sometimes have is, because of how small this hand grip is, I actually have to kind of open up my grip to get the magazine in. So, you know, you can kind of see it this way. I'm actually kind of opening my bottom fingers as I come in, and actually I just caught that finger. So as I come in, I've got to open up, get the magazine in, and then close back up. That's not something I had to do with even the Glock 27, and especially with the full-size handgun, because, you know, you can see when I take that magazine, if I'm not careful, my hand will wrap right underneath there. So I've got to open up my grip, get the magazine in, and then tighten it back up. And that's not something I really like to do. I'd much rather have a good solid grip the entire time. But on the other hand, we are talking about a CCW gun. So while it may be necessary to do a reload in a CCW defensive type situation, you know, you're going to want to get that magazine in as quickly as you can, but at the same time, it's not like a combat handgun or full-size handgun where that's going to be something that I'm doing a lot more frequently. So it's something I've decided I can work through. Another thing, I'll try to show you another side of this, but when I'm shooting and I'm shooting, my normal stance is with the thumbs forward, like a lot of the, you know, competitive shooters. It's a real common stance, but with both of your thumbs forward. Well, the problem is with this handgun, it's small enough that with my thumbs forward, I'm blocking almost this entire area with the slide stop and even up into here where the takedown lever is. So for me, this gun, I mean, maybe 1 in 20 times will lock back at the end of a magazine. So that's something I don't really like, but it is something that I also had with that high thumbs forward stance. It's something that I had with the Glock as well. So this isn't really unusual for a smaller handgun, but that is frustrating because if you shoot with that thumbs forward positioning, good chance you're going to keep that slide stop from stopping the slide. And I've talked to several other guys that are shooting these, and almost all of them have that same issue. So it's just something to be thinking about. You're probably not going to have the slide lock back after that last round. Along with that, because this is such a thin gun, I found that the way it fits my hand is just different from most other handguns I'm used to. To me, that's had a pretty consistent, I tend to throw my rounds a little bit left, and I'm pretty sure, you know, I know trigger press can come into that as well, but when I very careful, you know, shoot some slow rounds, very cautious of my trigger press, I can still get those rounds going left sometimes. So several guys I've talked to basically have said the same thing. You know, I'm sure it's a training issue, but some of it just has to go along with switching to this thinner pistol versus being used to a double stack or a larger handgun. So it just kind of affects the way it fits in your hand, and your normal stance, trigger pull, everything is affected just a little bit. So depending on what you're used to, that may or may not affect you as much. But those are basically my main, I guess you could say, complaints. Overall, I've been very pleased with this gun, especially, I think the biggest thing is the fact that it was $278. That's cheap. For a decent handgun, that's cheap. I've not had any function issues. I've probably shot, I'm guessing 400 or 500 rounds through it so far. So, you know, it's not a ton. I haven't done a class or anything with it because it is a concealed type pistol, but 400 or 500 rounds, no malfunctions. That's with a little bit of Spear Gold Dot, some Federal American ammo. I've shot a number of different hand loads through it. I did have some of my real light hand loads, had some weak ejection where it was just barely dropping free of the gun, but that was actually they were really light loads. Basically, they were just enough to cycle the action of another handgun, so I wasn't very surprised that they didn't give a strong ejection out of this one. I did also know my son shot it, and same thing, he had some weaker ejection, and I'm guessing that had a lot to do with his hand strength. You know, he's 12 years old, so he was able to shoot the gun fine and control it okay, but I'm guessing because he has a little bit less hand strength, he wasn't supporting the gun as well, so the ejection was a little bit weaker. So overall, especially, I think at this point the rebate's done, so if you missed it, you can't really get the $75 rebate right now. Maybe they'll offer it again at another time, but I'm definitely liking this gun. It's become my everyday CCW handgun. I like the small size. In fact, I'm trying to look for some of the guys I know that have the full-size M&P 2.0, especially a core model, and I'd like to shoot a full-size 9mm version of this, because I'm thinking I'd like a full-size 9mm and the M&P, and if it shoots similar to this one, I think I'm going to give that one a try. So I'm trying to figure out time to get with one of the guys that has one of those and actually get out and shoot it. So if you're considering this for a CCW handgun, you know, I definitely suggest if you're going to buy a handgun to try it first. Even if it gets good reviews, some things just fit better or feel better for different people. So see if you can get with somebody that has it, give it a try. Otherwise, I do think overall this is a good value, especially if you can find it on sale or with a rebate. So give it a try, and thanks for watching.